All right, Debra, welcome.
Thank you.
So excited that you're here.
Thank you.
We have been friends on Facebook for many years, but we have never met in person, which is funny about social media. During this whole pandemic, I have made a point to have the goal of more personal connection. More personal connection, because I feel like what's happening online is becoming very toxic and is starting to change people's perception about other people based off of politics, beliefs, and sometimes I just want to say, have you ever talked to that person in person? Like, have you really gotten a sense of what they're like? And I said, you know what, I need to start doing that myself. And so I'm really excited to have these conversations with amazing people like you. And I'm very honored that you made the trip out here. So thank you. I want to go ahead and just turn it to you. And we had a conversation the other day, and I was just in awe of your story. And it's really beautiful to see how people grow into what they become today. And so I feel like your story is definitely one that needs to start from the beginning. So why don't you just start off and take us through?
All right. Well, I am so grateful that you reached out. You know, as you said, we've been friends for so long, and literally that hill 1 mile, I clocked it. I lived 1 mile from you for years.
I know.
Years, and we've never actually met. So this is amazing. It took me moving away from the area to actually meet with you. You know, so
maybe it just wasn't time. Maybe I just wasn't ready.
Right. It's a thing. And I have been watching you on Facebook and watching your whole career and everything take off, and just, I have been like hearting your post and like so just cheering you on these last few years. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the feeling is mutual for sure.
So I appreciate it.
Well, why don't we'll start off with what you do for a living right now.
Okay.
And then take us back to how it started.
Okay. Well, I am triple board certified in anesthesia, pediatric anesthesia, and integrative medicine. Right now, I spend most of my time in Sonoma County when I work. I work half-time. I spend the other half-time at home with my kids. I share responsibility with my ex-husband, and we have it so that there's always a parent home with them. So
in the same home?
We have two separate homes, but he works 2 weeks, and then when he's off, and he's a dad. And I'm the same way. When I'm off, I'm just a mom.
Totally.
Not just a mom.
Yeah.
I get to be
a mom.
a mom without other distractions.
That's amazing.
So when I'm working, I spend much of my time actually at a small dental clinic. It's a surgery center here in Windsor doing pediatric anesthesia. It's a freestanding surgery center. We've treated over 20,000 low and no income kids over the last 8 years to get full dental restoration. You know, these kids otherwise would not get the care that they need. They're in pain. They can't eat. They've got chronic inflammation because their gums are, diseased, and it's just really an opportunity for a new start for them. And it's an amazing program. Of course we get state funding, but most of the funding is from individual and business volunteers, from the wineries, from individual donors here in Sonoma County. It's a huge blessing for all of these families. And we treat families, from other states, rarely, but from the Oregon border all the way to the Nevada border, all the way down to south of San Francisco.
They come to Windsor
just for the program.
Wow.
It's amazing.
How do they hear about the program?
Now there's a big campaign. So now it's on radios, and there's a big social media campaign. But historically, we went to these dentists in the middle of nowhere and said, this is what we do up in Eureka or, anywhere of these rural areas. And just would literally go into their office and say, here's what we do, and we can help your child. Just, refer them down to our facility, and they won't have to pay anything, and we'll take care of them. And you know, because when you do have to have most of your teeth worked on as a young child, you can't do that under sedation.
No.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
That's the cases we hear about in Texas. That's the cases where it goes bad. You know, we have a system there. We put a breathing tube in. There's an anesthesiologist there. It's not just the dentist, you know, directing a tech to give, you know, sedation. So it's safe. It's amazing.
So because of the time that they are under, it takes a very specialized team to really monitor that child.
Yes.
To make sure that everything goes well.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I have so much gratitude from day one working there. It's an amazing place. So that's one place I work. Another place I work is I have a ketamine clinic down in Foster City.
Mm-hmm.
That came about in 2018. I had an experience with a patient who was very sick and had gone to all the best doctors that they could find. They found a team here in the Sonoma County area that were able to help him. So him and his whole entire family flew here for this medical treatment, and I was involved peripherally, and really kind of worked on this protocol for PTSD, trauma, anxiety, recovery using ketamine based on the VA model.
Yes.
And, you know, worked with this patient for almost a year and really honed down a system and created a program called Consciousness Shifting Trauma Release. And that's what I do now in my clinic in Foster City. So after a patient gets some dose of ketamine, they're fully monitored. I do sensory reintegration. So I'm working with hearing, with sight, with touch, like all these things. You know, if you are, for instance, a woman that was raped, you might not be able to tolerate a smell, a sound, color, light. So when you're in this dissociated state, you can reintroduce these sensory stimulus in a way that you're not afraid.
It's control.
It's controlled. Your frontal lobe is actually disconnected from your amygdala, so you are perceiving the sensation without a thought about it. So there's no thought about a feeling of thought about a feeling. You don't ramp up in that ruminating type of escalating fight and flight fear response.
Well, tell us the significance of the frontal lobe and the amygdala, because I know the frontal lobe is like critical thinking. That's not fully developed until you're 25. Amygdala is what is affected, like when an animal gets rabies, right?
Exactly.
So what is its full function when it's not sick?
So if you think about, I learned a lot about brain function doing anesthesia, right? Because you have a person who is fully awake, and then you give a toxin, the anesthetic, and the person kind of loses their humanity, right? They kind of lose who they are. You give a little bit of an anesthetic, and they might start to become disoriented. They don't know where they're at. They might not be able to really localize things in the room. They might not be able to localize sounds coming in. They might not be able to talk right. They might start slurring. They might start having different posturing where they kind of like slouch a little bit. Their breathing might change. Their heart might change. You give a little more anesthetic, and now there's even less awareness, and they've almost become like an animal state. In other words, they're not able to have the self-awareness to be able to respond to everything around them. They're more reactive. So if I were to, you know, go up to this patient and maybe, you know, hold their arm, they might react, you know, pull back or do something, because they're more in this reactivity state. So when we're talking about people that have had trauma and it affects their frontal lobe, and that's really a lot of children right now, because of this whole social isolation and the fear that a lot of people are holding around the pandemic. We have a situation where the frontal lobe isn't able to have that higher executive function to be able to say, I'm safe, I'm here, you know, this is my environment, I have this grounded, like, touchstone, this is where I am. So the function of the frontal lobe is really to give you that highest human capacity for self-awareness. That, you know,
why is it that it's not fully developed until it's 25?
You know, there's two parts of that. There's many parts of it. But much of it is, you know, the usual growth and development.
Yeah.
Right? You're just growing. But even more of it is the pruning. So you're developing these circuits that you're using, you know, what you use grows and what you don't use kind of dies away. So if you're a child that is under sympathetic stimulation fear response all the time, you're going to start developing these pathways that are more connected to the amygdala. And for instance, autistic children feel fight or flight
all the time,
intimately.
Yeah.
Their amygdalas are much bigger than a child that doesn't have that. They're being used more. Those circuits are being used more. So it's really, you know, kind of this connection of this life experience that we have. And there's certain stages of life. When we're little, from 0 to 7, we're working on our physical body, right? Like babies are putting stuff in their mouths and they're touching everything and they're manipulating Legos and sand and water, and it's just all about touch. They're just touch beings.
Yeah.
Kids from 7 to 14 are like, they're touching with their heart, their soul. You know, what does it mean?
7 to 14.
7 to 14. What does it mean to, you know, feel?
Yeah.
You know, like kids that are teenagers are like feeling huge. They go out and they have these outbursts. I mean, that's a teenager, right? They're just emotionally unregulated, but they're learning. How do we go out? How do we come back in? How do we breathe emotionally?
Yeah.
How do we regulate? And then between 7 and 21, it is this development of this higher executive function. You know, what is, okay, now we know how to emotionally have this experience, but how do we know what the center is? How do we know where to come back to center? And that's what develops. And then from 21 to 28 is what is our purpose. So we have our body awareness, our emotional awareness, our thought awareness, optimally, you know, if it's not interfered with, and then what is our purpose awareness? That's a healthy human development. And if at any time there we have a situation of fear, the frontal lobe disconnects.
Disconnects?
It disconnects from the amygdala. We check out. We actually...
Is it a coping mechanism?
It's a coping mechanism. And if you look at people, for instance, we'll go back to the rape scenario, because I think a lot of us can, even if we didn't have that experience, we know someone that has gone through that. So when we are in that situation, time actually stops. We move out of the flow of time.
Yes.
So time stretches out or disappears altogether. If it's severe, we block it out altogether. But in the trauma response, you know, in optimal conditioning, our body is meant to feel the passage of time. That's the heartbeat, right? That is kind of a metronome that's kind of ticking,
keeps us connected
all the time. It's the rhythm of life they talk about. It's the sunset, it's the sunrise, it's the day-to-day, the seasonal change. Like, we are meant to resonate with that. When we have a trauma, we step out of that, and time keeps going. And then we come back in, and it's disorienting. And that's very similar to anesthesia.
Yeah.
When you have an anesthetic, it could be 20 minutes or 5 hours. You have no idea.
Yeah, you have no concept of time.
As soon as you close your eyes, they're opening. The next second is what it feels like, because you have stepped out of the passage of time. And that's kind of what trauma is. So
the ketamine, how is it addressing, explain again how the connection between ketamine, the frontal lobe, and the amygdala.
So when I use ketamine for treatment of trauma, when you give the ketamine dose, it's a purposeful dissociation versus the dysfunctional dissociation that you experience during trauma.
Caused by trauma.
Caused by trauma. So I purposely cause dissociation in a patient so that I can recalibrate their amygdala to kind, natural experiences.
So it's like a computer reset.
It's a Control-Alt-Delete.
Wow.
And when you are in that Control-Alt-Delete, you're closing all those tabs, the tabs of I'm not good enough, I'm not healthy, I'm not, whatever those tabs are that are running in the back of our mind 24/7, whether we're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
So while a patient is dissociated, I'm giving them natural frequency. I might have a metronome playing in the room, you know, at a good heartbeat, because maybe their heart rate's always 140 because they're under stress all the time.
Yeah.
You know, so I have a metronome playing at 60. I might have a violin in the room playing, you know, pure sound. I might have chimes that are used in yoga, playing pure, you know, the highest quality sensory experience I can give the patient. There's nothing that's electronic.
How do you know what they would benefit from? Like, you have all these things that you could be playing in the background. How do you choose which one will be in the background?
That's a good question. So, you know, with the interview before, I kind of ask about their experience. Now, a lot of it's suppressed.
Yeah.
So,
you're not getting all the details.
I'm not getting all the details. So I will take, you know, if she says, I can't stand sound. I go into a Target and it's so much sound, I just get overwhelmed. So I know that there's some sound component to it. If I have nothing to go on, you know, I've had cases where a woman just forgot she was raped until we did this experience. So when she came out and had remembrance of that, there was a whole other thing to be able to heal that. But then, yes, her disease got much better, that she was dealing with her chronic disease. But what I can do is when the patient's dissociated, I can try sound. And you can just watch. When I give the ketamine, they're on a monitor, and you can watch the breathing when they transition into different layers of consciousness, or when things are kind of, I want to say release, but obviously there's no way I can know that for sure.
Totally.
But when I give a certain amount of anesthetic, the breathing changes, and there's a sigh. There's like a breath holding, and then a new calibration, a new type of breathing. And
It's
so I'm
almost
watching
like they've
that.
come to a realization and then they're moving forward.
Some kind of
or
a new
release.
place, a new reset.
Yeah.
And so I do that with the anesthetic, but I also do that with my tools, and I watch their breathing response, because our consciousness is directly related to our breathing. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So how long obviously it depends on the depth of trauma that they've experienced. What is the time frame that you'll see a client for the ketamine treatments?
So
how many
typically-
treatments, etc.?
That's a good question, and that's something I address with every single patient. The typical, so if you were a patient at the VA, so you were a veteran who was in a war and that type of trauma, and a lot of it's auditory,
Yes.
right?
100%.
Because of the field.
My grandpa was a World War II veteran, flying with bombers.
So if you dropped a plate in the house during Thanksgiving or whatever,
Totally.
that would be very traumatic for him.
100%.
So at the VA, there's kind of a predetermined amount of sessions that they go through. And what they do is they set up everyone in these bays, and they have the patient lying in a gurney, and they monitor them, and the nurse puts an IV and hooks up the machine and starts the drip and walks away and comes back 30 minutes later. And they do this for, you know, a predetermined amount of sessions, 6, 8, whatever it is that they've decided.
So they're not getting the chimes, or
They're not getting any
the
intervention.
sound in the background or anything.
Yeah, and it works. And because it works in that situation was even why I looked at it to begin with.
Okay.
So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, there are many ketamine clinics popping up every month. There's a new ketamine clinic.
Yeah.
And typically, you go in to see these. They're anesthesiologists or pain doctors. And you go in and they say, okay, you need to sign up for 7 sessions, pay everything up front. This is the only way we do it, and we have good results. That's another way, and that's okay as well.
Totally.
And they may or may not have body work done or heat applied or whatever. They may or may not have other interventions, and that's fine. What I say in my practice is I believe in the patient's ability to know if something's working or not. So when I work with a patient, I say you will know after one treatment if this is working for you or not. And if you don't notice a big difference, we probably shouldn't do this again unless you feel very strongly that you want to try it a second time. I really honestly leave it. And I've only had one person say that they don't want to come back. So, you know, there is a lot to that. And I think that that validates the patient's participation.
Yes.
That's a very valid, important part of it.
100%.
I am not God. I am not the person that's going to be like, I know what's best for you.
Totally.
Even though I have a lot of training and a lot of experience, I can't know what a patient's feeling.
100%.
So I honor that in the patient. Typically though, what I see is anywhere between 1 and 3 treatments.
Mm-hmm.
We have a patient who, their sympathetic tone is much better.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have less amount of, extra heartbeats that, we get when we have anxiety.
Yes.
They have less of that ruminating thoughts at night that's
Mm-hmm.
keeping them up, where they
Mm-hmm.
can't really let go.
Yes.
They might now know, this is a really big one that I've discovered doing this, is that patients come back and they say, you know what, I felt like before I started this, there were so many options of things I could do for my illness.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many things, it just seemed impossible to navigate. But now I know that this, and this, these are the directions I want to go, because all that noise just falls away.
Mm-hmm.
And they just have a better, they're not healed,
Mm-hmm.
but they're on their path.
Yes.
And they feel like hope,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So,
There's more direction of where they need to go next.
yeah, led by them.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we have the
Well, you
analogy.
have included them
Yeah.
in the process. You have empowered them
Yeah.
to be like, this is working, this is not working. Noticing the difference in themselves, walking them through the process so they feel included in the process, and now they're empowered to take the next steps for themselves.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah. I give the analogy, these Gravenstein trees
Mhm.
that we have here
Mhm.
that are absolutely beautiful.
Mhm.
They have a lifespan of 100 years,
Wow.
give or take.
Yeah.
And these Gravenstein trees were planted about 110 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So they're past their due.
Mm-hmm.
And if you notice, in about July every year, there's all these 2x4s
Yes.
that go up under all the branches.
Mhm.
They have to do that because otherwise the trees would start dying
Yes.
and they wouldn't be able to produce fruit.
Mm-hmm.
But because they have to be supported, the fruit that comes out,
It's delicious.
well, it's delicious, but it's not as nutrient dense as it used to be.
Mm.
Because it's not the tree's forces from the earth pulling up. I
The
mean, this
struggle.
tree has to be supported. It can't even keep its limbs up.
I see. Okay.
It's past its due.
So there's something that has to do with working
Yes.
to produce results.
The struggle
Mhm.
and the involvement of the patient. And that's why I involve the patient in this process. If I were to say, I know exactly what to do for you,
Mm.
I know what's wrong with you,
Mhm.
I'm going to fix you.
Mm-hmm.
You might get better for a little bit.
Yeah.
But then when I'm not there holding you up, and that 2x4 goes away,
Yeah.
you're right back, or maybe worse.
That makes so much more sense, because there is an importance of doing the work yourself.
Yeah.
And if it's and that's kind of what society is trying to implement more, is just sit back, we'll take care of
Yeah.
it. Just take this and you'll be fine. And
Yeah.
they're downplaying the importance of doing the work yourself.
Yeah,
It's very beautiful that you include the client in that process.
for sure.
And I can see, so as you're talking and knowing a little bit about your story, I'm seeing just how integrity and adding warmth to your work is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to touch on that integrity.
Yes.
But is there anything else that would really benefit someone for knowing about the ketamine treatments?
I think with any treatment, it's like you said, there's a certain amount of ownership, and it's really good to seek out professionals to get help with these things, because there's obviously some things that, like, if you were in a car accident and your spleen is laying outside your body, I'm not going to be like, well, what do you want to do?
Yeah, totally.
Like, we're just going to fix it.
Totally.
There are certain extremes, but for a lot of these chronic illnesses, I think there's a big amount of working on our unconscious patterns,
Mm-hmm.
making the unconscious conscious.
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise we're being led by strings in the dark that we don't even see.
Totally.
So I think that's a really important part of the work, no matter what you're facing.
100%.
And ketamine can help with that, but there are so many other ways to access this. You know, meditation and yoga and exercise, and there's so many other ways.
But you're still doing the work while you're doing this.
You're still doing the work.
100%.
Yeah. And when you talk about integrity, you know, when you're dealing with anybody that's working with their consciousness, whether it's a yogi or a light worker or ketamine or anything, you know, it is so important for the person that is managing your care that they have integrity, that they are not implanting their ideas when you are in an altered state. And that could just be even yoga. When you go do yoga at these, you know, wonderful facilities that have these great people that have trained with the best of the best in India or whatnot, when you are doing yoga, you are vulnerable.
You are in a meditative state.
You're in a meditative state, and sometimes they have these mantras and these things that they say, and no matter who you are, you have to check, am I saying this for me? Or is this coming from a place that is universal and bigger than me? So I am always so careful when I work with patients to only give archetypes that resonate no matter what. In other words, fall always comes after summer. You know, things that are always true.
Yes.
The dogmatic truths of nature. So those are the only things I ever talk about when a patient's consciousness is shifted, because otherwise it can be dark.
100%. And there's always that good and bad side to everything. There are many modalities out there that can bring great healing to someone, but it depends on the facilitator and their levels of integrity and whether or not it's about them and how great they are for helping someone, or if it's really turn it off, it's all about the client.
Yeah.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Now, one more thing about the ketamine. Is it something, first of all, you mentioned illness, so I want to know a little bit more about what kind of illnesses are great candidates for ketamine. But also, is it something that someone can go to you like a doctor's appointment? Like we go one day, we're there for an hour or two, and then we can leave.
So the first question, so, you know, there's a saying I really love by Eckhart Tolle, and he says, identification with form is the death of being. And to that regard, any person who is identified with their illness is a great candidate. Because we are not an illness. We are not, you know, a really interesting thing I've been working with for the last 2 months is, how would you define yourself if you couldn't talk about race, gender, occupation, age, nationality, spirituality? How can you define yourself? And that's really, you know, at the heart of it. So when we identify with any form, and right now we're seeing political ideations, and we're seeing all this identification with things that are outside of us, which takes away the power of who we are. And so when you have a patient who's, I am a Lyme patient, or I am a breast cancer survivor, or whatever identification, that's a really good patient to work with. Because when you lose that, you can be. And when you can be, you can heal, because you can move. You're not stuck.
You don't have those external factors intermingling with the process of healing. Interesting. Okay, and then what's the visit like?
The visit is an hour. Sometimes if a patient's really anxious, I'll talk to them beforehand, because it's a thing. It's safe, but it's weird.
Yeah.
It's for sure weird. I've never tried it.
Yeah.
But I can tell you from the hundreds of patients that I've done this on, it's weird. You're dissociated. You might see a door and know it's a door, but not know what it's for.
Ah, interesting.
So it's odd. But I haven't had any patients had bad experiences.
Good.
You know, Although that can happen. If you're at a facility where somebody gives you medicine and walks away and you have a bad trip or whatever, it can create trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's something. But it's an hour. I do a full medical evaluation, just like you were having an anesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
You come back to my room, you have an IV in, I put monitors on, blood pressure cuff, EKG, pulse oximeter.
Mm-hmm.
You're on a table, I have a warm blanket on you,
Mm-hmm.
there's a pillow. Some
Mm-hmm.
people have an eye mask or music they want to listen to. And then we start the infusion, and the infusion takes 25 to 40 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and you recover in the exact same room,
Mm-hmm.
so you can come back into yourself
Mm-hmm.
as fully as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally with people that are very, very anxious, I give them a baby dose,
Mm-hmm.
just enough to transition their consciousness so they know they can get back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the coming back in that's the healing.
Mm.
It's not the going out,
Yeah.
but how do we come back in? Especially for people that dissociate as a coping mechanism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's how do we come back into ourselves?
Mhm.
That's the power.
Mm.
Because we might dissociate because we don't want to deal with it. It's a long day at work and super stressful and we just want to check out. But
Mhm.
how do we come back in?
100%.
That's the healing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Now I'm asking more questions about ketamine because it's something that I've been hearing about a lot lately. And so many people have questions about it. There's so many people here who have experienced trauma from losing their home in the fires. I'm also a self-defense instructor, so there's so many women that I meet with who are survivors of rape and assault. And there's ketamine has been something that I've been hearing about a long time. So I think, well, not a long time, but a lot lately. And I think that more information about it should be out there because of its benefits and the way it helps people. Okay, so now I want to get down to integrity and how it started.
Okay.
And we don't have to give it that specific label because I'm not about labels. But take us through your
Sure.
life and how you got to where you are right now.
Okay, so I'll give you the short version because
Okay.
it's been 45 years.
We're not giving away your age or
No,
anything.
So I was born to a moderate income family in the south side of Chicago. My dad had an auto parts business. Growing up, there was this idea in my neighborhood that if you could screw over your neighbor, you were cool. If you could steal power from the electric company, like you were it. If you can bring home things that fall off the back of the truck, I heard that phrase a lot when I was little, like, I was, the first person with a portable DVD player or whatever, like that was the cool thing. And the more illegal, the better.
Yes.
And from an early age, I really didn't understand. It was confusing to me because I had this sense of like, that's not right. But I didn't know what was right, and I didn't know why it wasn't right. I was the kid who stood up for other kids in school, like, what's the truth? If I saw that somebody was bullying somebody and tried to use some kind of narrative that wasn't true, like, I would cry, I would get really upset. I got in trouble for bringing money to school. I helped my dad count his till, and I brought a few coins to school, and I tried to buy a pencil from a kid in the courtyard because it was a really cool rainbow pencil, and I got nabbed by the ear by the playground person and brought to the principal's office, and the principal's just yelling at me, and I don't understand why I'm in trouble, and he says, do you even know how to count money? And I go back to the night before. I remember thinking, I don't know how to count what 3/4 are. And I said, well, I don't know what 3/4 are. And he thought I was being sarcastic. So I had this whole experience as a child of telling the truth and being punished for it. Over and over and over. And just really couldn't understand what was happening. So fast forward, I go to college and I start to experience going to friends' houses for dinners and seeing how they live. And I was so uncomfortable because I didn't know the social rules.
Yeah.
I didn't understand, like, everybody always did the right thing, and I didn't know what the right thing was.
Yeah.
So I was so uncomfortable. I would just sit and just watch, like, okay, so that's how you do that. Okay, so that's how you respond. Okay, that's tipping someone. Just those little things that I just never really saw. Holding doors open for people, or just those little things, you know, or saying like, oh, I made a mistake. Like, whoa, that was a big one. Hearing that for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I was younger, it was, you know, it was cool to not have values. It was cool to not have integrity.
Yeah, but you didn't have anything to compare it to.
I had nothing. So I'd say my first big experience was when I was during my residency, and we had a patient that said they were allergic to some IV fluid, and, you know, I said, we don't even use that IV fluid here, and long story short, somebody decided that it was, you know, they were going to prove that that patient couldn't be allergic to that IV fluid and made sure that patient had the fluid. I refused to give it, but the patient had it, and he coded, and he almost died, and it was hours later. And
you guys spent a long time resuscitating him.
long time resuscitating him. Everything you can think of, everything. So after my shift there, I go up to the ICU, and the family was sitting right there by the bedside, and I have my coat on that says anesthesia. And they said, oh, thank God you're here. We were told this was an anesthesia reaction. Please tell us what happened. And in that moment, I was like, I can't not tell the truth.
Yeah.
I can't. I know I'm going to get in trouble. But I don't know what else to do. I have to just, okay, so I said, get a copy of the medical record, get these tests for these things, because I know what's going to happen. They're going to try to say it's either this latex reaction or antibiotic reaction. Your family member had exposure to neither of these things. Yeah. And, you know, thank you, doctor. And I'm like, well, just, you know, good luck. You know, what else am I going to do? I'm this lowly resident. So the next morning I was called into my chairman's office and just torn apart. You know, you are not a team player. How dare you? How dare you do that? You know, who do you think you are? You can't talk to the family. You know, how dare you go against your attending? How dare you go against this department? You know, you are not part of this team. And I walked out of that office thinking, what am I doing? Yeah. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? I was in shock. Well, so...
Because let's go back for a second to be clear on what happened. Patient's about to get surgery. They're asked, do you have any allergies? And the patient says, I am allergic to this IV fluid. And you're like, well, we don't even use that IV fluid. But someone else hears that and says, there's no way you're allergic to that IV fluid.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
I'm going to prove the client wrong.
To his face. I'm going to prove you wrong. I know what's best for you. Yeah. Those are the words that were said, and some more.
Even though that IV fluid wouldn't have even been part of the equation. Right. But it was an ego thing. Yeah. And so this client then gets injected by it. Codes. Yes. Almost dies. Yes. And then the family is told that it was an anesthesia reaction. Yes. And you said, no. Correct. This is what you need to do to prove it otherwise. And then you're reamed for it. Yeah.
I was blackballed.
Blackballed. Okay, so what does that mean in the medical industry?
So that means during that time we had just instituted the 80-hour work week. You can't go beyond that. Yeah. That was the max limit of how much a resident could work.
Wow. That's 16-hour days.
Yeah. They violated that in my instance. They had me working longer hours than I should have. They gave me the worst cases. They just really stuck it to me. Yeah. In hindsight, yay, because I got all that experience. Yes. You know, but, you know, a week after the incident happened, I had to present in something called Grand Rounds. Morbidity and mortality is what it's called. So I am, picture this, in the middle of this auditorium, 200 people in it, the heads of every department, and my colleagues, and my resident, friends and everyone,
After you've just pissed them off.
after I've just made everybody whatever.
Yeah.
And this was the case of the year. It was a big deal, right? So I'm up there and I have my PowerPoint presentation, and I did manage to find another instance where this happened in someone else. I managed to connect the dots of how this could happen, very unlikely as it was, but, and after I gave my presentation, like many department heads stood up and said, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen. And it happened.
Yeah.
So I was like, I walked out of there thinking, again, why am I in medicine? If this is what medicine is, I will never not do the right thing for the patient.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a word for it yet, So I had 2 attendings come up to me quietly afterwards and say, listen, you did the right thing, but I'm never going to say anything because I can't.
Yeah.
So that little piece gave me enough to continue, to take the next step. Thank God for those 2 attendings, because I would have quit.
Yeah. Why is it so hard for people to come forward and support you when you've done something right? Is it that fear of just rejection and being blackballed too?
It's the boys' club, historically, right? But I have to say that in the last, I would say 10 years, the amount of whistleblowers that can come forward and can expose in the banking industry, in the tech industry, in education, in medicine, and it gives me so much hope to see that. So after this experience, I said, I can't work in this adult hospital. I need to get out as much as possible.
So they blackballed you for 3 years.
3 years.
Wow. What was that like for you at the end of 3 years? What state were you in mentally, physically, emotionally?
Well, I was able to I found an outside rotation outside of the hospital, an hour away at a children's hospital. And I didn't like kids. I was afraid of kids. I had never changed a diaper, but I was like, you know what?
You were in your early 20s, right?
Late 20s.
Yeah, late 20s, okay.
But I could be out of this hospital system.
Yeah.
And I could be in a place where, oh my goodness, they put the patient first.
Yeah.
Everyone cares about this patient. I saw a surgeon working in there and their arm bumped the light, and the tech said, oh, you just bumped your light, you need a sleeve and you got to change that. That would have never happened at my hospital.
Interesting.
Never. And I was like, they did the right thing. Oh my gosh. So I was so excited that there was, and then I discovered I loved working with children. I loved this. It was like, wow, this is so cool. And I applied for a fellowship at LA Children's, and they had a program in there called leadership. Leadership training. It was a 3-year course, although I was only required to take 1 year.
Yeah.
I ended up taking all 3, but it was about, we studied Covey's 7 Habits and Who Stole My Cheese and all those leadership books. And that's when I learned what integrity was. During that year, I was like, a light turned on, and I was like, there's this thing
that I've been feeling my whole life.
Yes, and I was so excited and yay. And so, but it took time to learn.
Yes.
It took time to get rid of that anxiety about not knowing the right thing to do, and to really come into my being of being able to be confident.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking year 2 and 3 electively because I was so enamored by this. It was first individual leadership and then team leadership, and then I was at LA Children's, and then I moved to Northern California in this area with my family, and I started working in some of these facilities, and it wasn't the same feeling because it's just a different kind of medicine. And I remember asking someone, well, why can't it just be like that?
Yeah.
So naive, right?
Yeah.
Well, I saw it at LA Children's. Why can't we just adopt that here?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand, and whatever. But long story short, that was my introduction to what integrity was. And from that moment on, I sought people out who were doing the things that I thought, wow, they stood up for that patient. I want to learn from that doctor.
Yeah.
They called the lab out when, they thought maybe they mixed up the samples. in a way that got the answer and wasn't fighting.
Mm-hmm.
They were able to really get to the
No
bottom.
one had to force it out of
No
them.
one had to force it. They were
Yeah.
able to have a good relationship, and then that's where kind of warmth came out of a few years later, is using the idea of emotional warmth to get to the highest purpose of whatever we're trying to do. What is the question that we need? How can we use warmth to really help that person who's suffering? Because at the end of the day, in my world, the only thing that matters is how can we relieve suffering in another human being. And I don't care if, you know, you are the person working on the side of the road to help fix the road or whatever. We are all in the same boat. You know, there is so much suffering, and we suffer for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can use that connection, like you were talking about at the beginning of this. You know, how do we connect with other people to be able to, you know, come up with that thing that's bigger than you
Than
or
us.
me. There's something that is this bigger thing
Yeah.
that can help more than just you and me.
Yes, that can help the masses. So let's define cold and warmth in the medical field,
Okay.
because that's something you obviously were noticing, cold, and you were drawn to warmth. But for those watching and not understanding what that means, break it down for us a little bit.
Okay, so I was always a person who had a million layers on.
Yes.
And so just for context, we're in a warehouse here that's
Yes.
not heated, and it is a little chilly, but
Yes.
it's manageable for sure. So I was always a person with several layers on everywhere I went, and I was always feeling cold. And I always wondered, you know, why, you know, what is this thing? How come, for instance, people with chronic medical conditions like Lyme disease are 97 something versus 98? You know, what is it? What's
Degrees
up with
of the body.
degrees of the body,
Yeah.
Fahrenheit? What's up with all this like increase in chronic medical diseases in children? When I went to medical school, we had a pediatrics class where we learned about pediatric illness, and an adult internal medicine class where we learned about adult illness, and neither, you know, they did not cross. But now we're seeing kids with adult diseases, children with type 2 diabetes, which we never
I see what
saw,
you're saying.
children with hypertension, or children with these things that weren't kid diseases, adult cancer in children, adult brain cancers, adult, you know, what's happening? And I looked into it, and I saw that 1 in 2 children have one of 20 chronic medical diseases. Half of our kids are sick.
They're sick.
You know, asthma, allergies, autism, ADHD, you know, like those are the A's, but there's a whole alphabet
Yeah.
of chronic medical conditions.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just really thought about that and looked into that and doing my anesthetics, and I just started asking so many questions. You know, the kids that did better under anesthesia, why did they do better? And, you know, the things that I noticed were, you know, it sounds so simple, but the families that were very close. We have a very big Hispanic population here, and, you know, when you watch a child go under anesthesia, and I always bring the mother back because I think mommy medicine is amazing and try to
100%.
encourage that bond. And, you know, seeing these Hispanic mothers with the babies, and they're just, their tone, there's no anxiety in the tone, they're connected. You can see the child is actually listening.
For their mom.
Yeah, there's this like call and response between the mother and child, and it's warm and it's real and it's beautiful. You know, where we might have another patient that comes back, and the mom, even though the child's having surgery, that moment appears to be about the mother. They're losing it,
Yeah.
which I can understand.
100%.
Like, this
Yeah.
is scary.
Yeah.
Your child's going under anesthesia, and they
Yeah.
could die.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a chance.
Yeah.
So I get it. But in those situations, you know, I'll often say, like, this is about your child.
Yeah.
You know, I will help you after this.
Yeah.
You will get help after this. But
Yeah.
right now, this is about your child.
Yeah.
You know,
Provide that
be with
comfort
your
for the
child. Sing to your child. Talk to your child. Be with them. We will help you. I promise we'll help you
Yes.
after this.
Yes.
And those kids that have that warmth when they go to sleep, and then at the end of the case, we always have warm blankets on them, and it's quiet, and it's just a warm environment. Those kids just when they come out of their anesthesia and they wake up, it's so smooth, it's beautiful, they're not going into bronchospasm, their lungs aren't cramping, they're not shaking, they're not having emergent delirium.
Yeah.
In significant numbers that are different than other places that just don't have that. I mean, there really is a difference.
Yeah.
So I really started asking, what is this warm thing? So I started digging up the books, looking at history, and saw that, about 100 years ago, we were a society of diseases of warmth.
Yeah.
We were dying of bloodborne diseases, fevering illnesses, cholera, plague, TB, like these were hot diseases where, they were fevering diseases. And now, you look at kids and like, you're lucky to get a good fever in a kid. Many kids will go through the entire winter, pre-coronavirus. They would go through an entire winter where they really didn't fever, yet they were never really healthy. They had a runny nose for 3 months of every winter. They were always almost sick, but never really sick, which was an interesting thing to think about. And then looking at the last 100 years and watching these diseases of heat turn into acute hot diseases of heat, turn into these chronic cold diseases like asthma, like allergies, like autism, like, all of these cold chronic diseases. We are meant to have, as we're growing and developing as children, we have this kind of breathing process where a child will have a growth spurt, and then they'll get wider. They'll put on weight, and then they'll have a growth spurt, and then they get wider. And it's this breathing process, right? And it's supposed to be very rhythmic, like the sun rises every day.
Yeah.
This is growth and development. And you have the pruning, the things go away you don't need. You see children start to shape as they get older, right? Children are very amorphous when they're little, just puffy and just love all those little rolls. But as they start to grow, they start to get shape. And as you're a teenager, the girls start to look different than the boys. That's normal growth and development. So when we get an immune activation, because we meet something in the environment, we are supposed to turn on our immune system, get warm, start to fever, which turns on all these different enzymatic processes. One of them is methylation in the liver, that the C677T methylation genetic variant is thermoregulated. It gets turned on with heat.
Yes.
So we start to detox with fevers. That's just one genetic area in the methylation cycle, but we have many enzymes that turn on because of the fever and illness. And what it does is it kind of starts the detox pathways churning more effectively. Our liver, phase 1 and phase 2 detox, starts to regulate more. Our kidneys start to process toxins more. We just get more blood flow. The heart rate goes up in a fever. We know this. Breathing goes up. We just go into this detox mode. So, and then after that, we should overcome that immune stimulus. We should learn it, become more educated, immunocompetent, and optimally, we should have a growth development. We should have some kind of developmental leap after an illness. But, that's optimal. But what we're seeing now in many children is they meet this thing, and they might have some runny nose for weeks. They never really fever. Their hands and feet are cold. You could just touch the child. Yeah. And they're cold on their extremities. They never really master this thing that they were introduced to. And instead of a developmental leap, they're purple under their eyes. They just look sallow, pale. They're hyper.
Is it because their fevers have been stopped?
Well, there's two things. We know that children, based on I think a 2015 environmental working group study, that children are born with 200 plus toxins in their umbilical cord. That's just today's kid. Yeah. From the air, from the water, from food, from life. So kids are more toxic, so there's a lot more to try to process. And when we're an immune system, we want to be able to look at something and say, that's my enemy, or whatever. That's the thing I need to master. And if you're dealing with all these other things, it's blurry your immune system doesn't have good vision.
That makes sense.
It can't really hone in on that thing.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why kids don't fever. And the other thing is, yes, 3 generations of suppressing our body with, in 1909, the Flexion report came out that said there are all these individual pieces of our body. We went from this idea that we are a whole human being in a whole environment, that we have a call and response to all these fragmented little things that can be separated out, so that, the idea was that we could, find that one problem and fix it. Like we could
Instead of addressing the whole.
But they thought, hey, you can lift the hood up of the car and fix that spark plug and then you're good as new. That was kind of the thinking.
We should be able to do the same thing to the body.
We should be able to. It's mechanistic thinking versus the vitalistic living thinking. Which of course
I'm
there's
just gonna
this,
double check to make sure this is still going. Good.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's this mechanistic versus the vitalistic thinking, which, of course there's a middle ground.
Yes.
Right? We're not, the vitalists of the 1800s missed a lot.
Yeah.
And the mechanistic people of today are missing a lot.
Yeah.
There is this middle way that we can do to optimize and bring in both ideas of thinking, so that yes, if we need a new kidney, we can get the new kidney, but also take care of the whole patient.
Yeah.
So when we switched in 1909 with this Flexion report from vitalistic to mechanistic thinking, we started looking at symptoms as enemies instead of guides. So medicines were created to get rid of the symptom. So we were antibiosing everything in the body.
Yes.
So antibiotics, antipyretics, which is Tylenol, ibuprofen.
Yes.
It was called something else back then. But antacids, beta blockers for the heart, alpha blockers. We have antidepressants. And then from there, we had a whole culture of, the war on drugs, the war on terror, the Cold War. It's this whole idea, letting your babies cry it out. It's this whole idea of fragmenting out that symptom in hopes that we would be healthier. But if we were to even go the mechanistic route and we had a car and the check engine light came out and we said, well, we're just going to fragment out the engine, the car's not going to work. When we start to see symptoms as the check engine light, and we can address that symptom and allow the symptom to go to its natural conclusion without damage to the body.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes fevers are too high and they're going to damage.
Yes.
Sometimes fevers need to be brought back from this peripheral destructive area, and they need to be guided. It's not to say that, I would ever advocate letting a child fever it out on a couch unsupervised. And likewise, there isn't a number of a fever that is inherently dangerous.
I see what you're saying.
Mostly. It's the rate of rise. Are the kids cold in their feet and hot in their head? That's where we have a problem. Fever's meant to be in the gut. 80% of our immune system is in the gut. So we want the heat to be here. We want our T cells and all of our immune system to be working in this area to master what's happening. And when the heat is truly in the gut, the legs are warm all the way out to the toes. And you don't have a headache. And you're not hallucinating. And you're not delirious. And you're not seizing. There's so many kids now that when, I hear reports with my patients, the mother says, yeah, Johnny's hallucinating. He's seeing stuff that isn't here. He's out of it. That didn't happen in the 70s. We were still had a little bit of our warmth process. Yeah. And now after 3 generations of anti-biosing, anti-physiologic medicine, we have become we have cold physiology. Yeah. So when we do bring the heat down to the belly with all these different ways of working, and these are just standard nursing stuff. This is not woo-woo medicine. I'm not talking about, calling in a shaman or, I'm talking about basic, hot water bottles to the feet, increasing perfusion.
Yeah, but people don't know this.
Yeah.
It's not being talked about.
It's starting to be more talked about now. Because thank goodness the whole idea of wellness is becoming more popular. Yes. And because we can't afford medical care. And what can we do to kind of help? So when we do have the heat in the belly can expand. like when we get the fever in the belly and the blood vessels, fever causes blood vessels to dilate. It's just a physiological response. Well, we can get dilation here and do okay. But if the heat's in the head and we dilate, we have a skull.
Yeah.
So it
You
can't
can't go anywhere. Yeah.
it can't dilate. And
Yeah.
that's where we get the problems, the seizures and the fogginess and all of that. So, properly treating fevers while realizing that these kids are already mostly at a disadvantage because of the previous toxic load they were born with. It's a dance that
Yeah.
we do. It's incorporating the best of what we have in Western medicine with the best of what we have of what I call, old-fashioned grandma knowledge. Like what did we do back then? Put a cold compress here and lots of blankets, and then
Yeah.
you would sweat under the covers,
Yeah.
and you would sweat it all out, and
Yeah.
watching to make sure the child is still coherent. Children should be fussy. When they're sick, they should be a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
If they become complacent or they become easy, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. And society is so prone on addressing fussy and,
The
hard.
symptom.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Wow. And so you start advocating for warmth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what does that look like?
So, initially it was working with mothers, mostly a few fathers, but honestly, in Sonoma County it was a lot of the mothers I was working with, teaching them what a physiologic healthy fever looks like. So I would do workshops and teach them how to do hot water bottles in the lower legs, and we don't want the children to suffer physically.
Yes.
It's not about that.
Yeah.
When I say suffering causes growth, I'm talking about the internal
Internal.
physiologic immune education.
Yes.
That is the suffering.
Yes.
The child should not be suffering.
Yes.
We should do whatever it is, be at the bedside, tell the children, you are healing, you are strong, giving them these messages that are, encouraging, and, we're going to get through this, and I would walk the parents through how many days that they would expect this fever, and the highs and lows, and when they, 11 o'clock looks different than 5 o'clock at night, and it's very predictable if you let the fever run its course, and it's running well. So I worked with this physical warmth for quite a while, and then, I got back to that, when I watched those people that had integrity, one of the qualities that they had was this emotional warmth that wasn't kissing up. They
It
had
was
their
just
own.
knowing what the client is going through,
Right.
addressing needs,
Yep.
soothing them when needed.
And they had their own sense of uprightness. And they stayed there. They didn't go into that person's energy field. They didn't go in and monopolize that. These people that I looked up to really had their own sense of, this is me and my boundary. They had very good, but yet beyond this solid boundary was this warmth that emanated from them, that you could feel it and witness it, and just see when they use the words that they use to try to get the story out, or if they were dealing with conflict, how the way they spoke and the words they used, and the way they kept their contact in a non-threatening way. You just see people just
Yeah.
disarmed. How do you disarm a person and then have the integrity not to take advantage of them?
Yes, that is another aspect of it.
So just watching that, and that's when I thought, wow, there's this whole other part of warmth that has nothing to do with medicine, but it has everything to do with medicine. Watching Native American cultures, the parent and the child, watching the Hispanic cultures with the mothers and children, and just watching warmth and where it shows up in society. And I talked a lot about it in little lectures here in Sonoma County. I have many dear friends here in Sebastopol who are these old white men, and I don't know why, but I have managed to. They just have a part of my heart. I have spoken with them many times. They were at the coffee shop, and I would just sit down and I would talk with them for 1-2 hours about their prostate or about their wife that died or about whatever it was, and they just became very, very dear friends of mine. And so they would often be coming to my lectures, interestingly, and very supportive and very awesome. And I would talk to them about, you know, we have a lot of mothers here in Sonoma County who are either single or, in order to make it, have fathers that are never around. So when you see these mothers in town, open the door for them. Ask what you can do for them. You know, see what they need. How can you help them? You are important in this town. You know.
So it's not so much about just adding warmth to the medical industry. It's adding warmth to everyday life interactions.
To society. How can we connect intergenerational? You know, these men that sat around gossiping all the time, they could have a purpose. You know, now they could be helpful. And they loved that. You know? And all the ways that warmth can manifest, for sure. For sure.
So how long were you advocating for warmth? What did that journey look like for you?
Well, so with my patients in my clinic, that was for a few years, specifically dealing with fevers. I had a fever hotline. Patients could call me at 3 in the morning as soon as their child had a fever, because I wanted to hold their hand through the first fever that was going to be unlike any treatment they ever had before, because they weren't going to use Tylenol or Motrin. At least not initially, unless the child was really suffering and we were behind on it, you know, intense ear pain or something, because I don't want the child to suffer. So I did that for a few years. And then I started, you know, going on the lecture circuit and talking about warmth. You know, just really talking to the audience, like here in Sonoma County, but also, you know, in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco and all over the country.
How did people receive it? What were their reactions to it?
People came up to me afterwards and were like, that is something I never even considered, and oh my goodness, I can do this with my child. I've been spending $5,000 a month on all these treatments, and oh my goodness. And then, you know, that's the initial thing, right? And that doesn't really mean much if it doesn't manifest. But I would see the person at the next lecture series somewhere else in a different town and be like, oh my gosh, I did that thing. And oh my gosh, my kid had a growth development. And oh my gosh, I've healed my trauma. You know, all of this. And so then the proof is in the pudding, where you're actually seeing the results of applying warmth. And so, you know, I did actually write a book, and it's 23 chapters, but I didn't ever publish it. And maybe that's something I will do, maybe not. But, you know, and a year after that, I saw somebody else came out with that book, and I thought, thank you. Because I didn't get to it. Thank you for doing that. And I had never met that person before in my life, but I don't care. We both had the same contact with whatever that impulse was, and thank you for doing that. Because I didn't get to it. And now it has taken off a lot throughout the country. And I met a dear physician, Dr. Martin, in Germany, in Dornach, actually Switzerland, last year, and he created a fever app that talked to the, you know, recorded the symptoms from the mothers and had some suggestions on how to do compresses and hot water bottles and all this stuff. A fever app.
That's genius.
And he is trialing it here as a beta version here in the U.S. And again, I'm like, thank you. Because I don't have to do it. And it's here. And so much gratitude for that. This impulse is here, and it's becoming more. And the person that sponsored this was the equivalent of the American Academy of Pediatrics in Germany.
Wow.
So it's mainstream.
That's great.
Because it should be. You know? So that's been my thing. And then, you know, I did an N of 1. We say that in research. You know, an N is the number of people that you're studying. So an N of 1, I studied myself. I started doing cold thermogenesis. And that is where you go into cold water. You get your skin temperature to about 52, 55 degrees, and you know, sit in this cold water. Some people do cold air, but water penetrates deeper, as we know. And the thing is that, you know, you move before you go in. You get your body warm. Your blood vessels vasodilate. You go in the cold water, everything vasoconstricts, and all the blood goes to your center, to your vital organs, right? It's a vagal response, and it's a survival response. You go into this deep vagal tone, your heart rate just goes down 20 points. You actually It's so cool that you hold your breath for a little bit.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is your brain stops the thoughts. You can't think about your taxes or your mortgage that's due or the fight you have with your spouse. It's just all that, you are just like, everything stops.
Because you're in survival mode.
Yes.
Yeah.
And after however long you can tolerate it, I started with 30 seconds because I was cold. I had processes in my body that weren't actually flowing and my feet hurt. So I could only do 30 seconds just up to my knees. And over the next year and a half, I was able to go in off the coast here, Sonoma County, all the way up to here. Yesterday I was down in Santa Cruz. Now granted the water's 58, so it's not as cold, but I was able to just dive right in.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you become cold adapted.
Yeah.
And in doing this, after you go in and your body vasoconstricts, when you come back out of the water, you get this reactive hyperemia. And that means that your blood vessels dilate to a further extent than they were before you went in. Now, if you can think of a river that's going and there's sludge that comes in from toxins, maybe from the wineries or whatnot, agriculture, and what happens is you have these watershed areas on the sides of the river that accumulate the toxins over years. Well, when you have a little bit of an increase in flow from whatever you're doing, stress or whatever, it's going to pick up some of these toxins and bring it into the body and fill the toxin bucket, and maybe you might have symptoms. Well, when you have reactive hyperemia in this way, doing cold thermogenesis, you have flow into these watershed areas. You capture all of these toxins into your bloodstream and you pee it out. And the thing is, unlike all these fancy detox celery drinks and whatever we're doing these days,
it's your body doing it.
Your body's doing it, so it's not going to overdo it. You're not adding a synthetic supplement. You're not pushing your body. You're not suppressing your body. You're using your body's innate ability to detox. So I did this for a year and a half. And so, you know, I described that person that had all those different layers. I went to that person to a person, when I looked around, I'm like, I'm wearing exactly what everyone else is wearing, and sometimes less. And I'm okay with it. And I'm not a big person. You know, I don't have a lot of fat on my body. My body composition changed. I didn't start weightlifting, but all of a sudden I had muscle definition. I'm sure my brown fat went up, which, you know, is tied to mitochondrial function, which is the heat producer. And it really made a difference in my heart warmth.
How do you gauge that?
I felt like...
Do you mean like your ability to love?
Yeah. And receive love. And be vulnerable. And be okay with making mistakes. And like the whole like ego thing, which I mean, I had made significant strides. Because I had so many challenges, but there was like this whole other way of being where it was like, it really was okay.
There's a confidence that comes with allowing your body to do what it needs to do naturally. And it ties into every other aspect in your life. And it's so important to realize that when you allow your body to do what it's supposed to do and tap into it, everything else also falls into place, because you're not trying to change anything, you're not trying to control anything, and it manifests in other ways as well.
That is a huge point. You know, I was telling you right before we started this, I drove up from San Jose, and it's like, okay, 2 hours in the car, like whatever. I put 30,000 miles on my truck in the last 6 months because I am working and being all these different places. And like you said, like this ability to be able to know where your center is, no matter what's going on around you. And right now, there is no stability. You know, like, no, I'm not making any kind of judgment about this because I'm not an epidemiologist or an immunologist. But you know, the CDC said it's airborne. Then they said it's not airborne. Then they said it's sometimes airborne. And
You're
what
talking
does
about
that? COVID.
Yeah.
Thank you. What does that do to our psyche?
Yeah.
When we're being told by the experts, it definitely is, it definitely isn't, and maybe it is. It really puts us in this state of what is happening, and it's like, it's like the ground is moving. It's like an emotional, psychological earthquake all the time. So
That's a great way to put it.
yeah, so with me driving and being in all these different places, I started a brand new job at Valley Children's in Fresno last week. Amazing hospital, amazing people, but thrown back into this really sick kids in a really complex medical system using computer charting, which I don't do. You know, I was proud of myself at 45 for doing something like that, because that's a big change from what I had been doing. But how do you take your sense of you, the I am, the core, the thing that isn't defined by those things we talked about, how do you take that with you into a place
That's like
you don't know anything about?
Yeah.
And how do you stay not rattled?
Yeah.
You know, my first day, like the computer didn't work and the sign-on didn't work, and the drugs are in different places, and I don't know the staff, and I don't know the abilities, and I don't, like all that, but how do I stay here and not, because if I get pulled into this, here's me and here's my patient. I have to stay here. And that's something that I've learned. And for people going through all this uncertain times, you know, I found that breath work is really helpful. Just the basics, and not some like weird guru type whatever, you know, esoteric, but just literally, how do we breathe? Sometimes I'll literally just sit like this because it forces your rib cage up, and just breathe like that. Sometimes I do an exercise where I breathe in, hold my expansion of my ribs at the end of my in-breath, breathe out, but continue to hold that. The next breath, bring in again, hold it, breathe out, breathe in again, and just to allow that expansion. Since I was a little girl, I've caught almost every sunrise and sunset. I think that is a very big part of the body's breathing, right?
Because it's the earth's breathing too.
It's the earth's breathing. It's our connection to the inherent rhythm, which, you know, we have something in our body called the clock gene. It's in every single one of our cells. It programs our mitochondria to do what they have to do. Our mitochondria are very much involved in detox, in emotional regulation, in brain pathway regulation. And so if we can see that set point, that still point of sunset, sunrise, it really makes us stop. And when we make decisions in this world coming from that center of groundedness, optimally, we want to wait for the pause and then act. Because that's the call and response of natural rhythm.
Well, then that makes sense as to the benefit that you noticed after the cold treatments that you were doing in the ocean, and the significance of mitochondria and how that treatment actually browns your fat. It creates more mitochondria, and then the mitochondria now have this huge effect on you physically, emotionally, mentally. It makes sense as to that feeling that you got of being more centered and grounded, and how everything is connected. And if we allow our body to do what it's supposed to do and actually enhance those systems, how it benefits us as a whole.
Absolutely.
I 100% see that. And being in the industry that I'm in, you know, fitness and, you know, helping people achieve their weight goals and their body fat goals, etc., I try to explain to them that when there's overweight, it's almost like your cells have become clogged and it kills off the mitochondria. And so as you and in that state, that cell keeps reproducing itself, which is why people increase in weight. And that when you start to your fitness journey and people want to see fast results, I'm like, no, do you understand that that cell has to first detox, unclog, and then rebuild the mitochondria, and then start reproducing in that state with more and more mitochondria. So it's a very technical process that happens internally when you are losing weight. And I try to touch up on the mitochondria, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you. That was a really great explanation. That was awesome. I'm going to interview you next.
But it's to hear you talk about the importance of mitochondria and how you feel it feels so good to hear someone else talk about it too.
Yeah, likewise. That's
Yeah.
why when you were talking, you're
Yeah.
like, keep going.
You speak my language.
Mito nerds.
Yeah, right? Browning fat. Yeah. So then talk to me a little bit. So you're doing the warmth advocacy, and you're working with others and doing that. How does your career then morph? You were telling me the other day about this seminar you happened to go to, kind of in a real random way, and what that did for you.
Oh, yeah. So 2014, I believe, I also do biodynamic osteopathy, which is an offshoot of my osteopathic education.
Okay, and explain a little bit what that is, because I'm like, say what?
Say what?
Yeah.
So when we talk about biodynamic, the easiest way to understand that is, especially in this area, biodynamic farming.
Yes.
So you are farming based on the rhythm. So we know, for instance, when there is a full moon, there is a different water content in the soil, in the plants, in the trees.
Yes.
It just is. It's science. Like we know this. So there are certain things that you want to plant or not plant during stages of the moon or other, things that are happening, seasons of the year and whatnot. So
let's give an example. Full moon, root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, beets. New moon, things that grow above ground.
Above ground, right? Because what we're thinking about is mold development specifically because of the extra water.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
mold development.
Mold, that's part of it.
Okay.
So even with grapes, we think about when we're going to harvest the grapes, plant the grapes, with the moon cycle, because mold on grapes is no good. No, you can't use them. And even Kendall Jackson knows this. They don't know it.
Yes.
But they know it.
Yes.
Yeah. So, so when we're talking about osteopathic medicine, biodynamically, it is the medicine that looks at everything that affects the patient, all the factors, psychological, emotional. Is it a woman who's currently menstruating or not? Is it someone who's, got low thyroid function, and how does that affect their heat metabolism? Not all of it, it's not here, but it's something you can feel in your hand. Just like, if you're a very good farmer, you can feel the leaf and know it's a full moon. It's just those things that you end up being able to feel in the patient and work with the patient in their body, mechanics. So I was at this conference, and up in Ashland, and there is this big U-shaped where all the participants and the instructor is in the front. And I was at the very front seat on this side, and the very front seat on the other side was this person who was an MD, and I thought that's weird because this instructor doesn't allow MDs because it's an osteopathic thing. You have to be a DO to come here. I thought, well, that's weird. Why is he here?
Wait, so explain to me why an MD wouldn't be there.
Because it's supposed to be an osteopathic extension.
Okay.
It's an extension of osteopathic training. And if you hadn't had the osteopathic training,
I see. Okay.
You wouldn't be there.
Okay.
So I thought.
And my question is, why doesn't everybody have osteopathic training?
Well, it's all kind of morphing to be the same thing now anyway. Okay. But yeah, it's that's a whole other topic.
I'm sure.
So I thought, for the first 2 days of this conference, this 3-day conference, why is he here?
Because everybody has their plaques.
Yeah. And you introduce yourself. And I thought, this is unusual. This is unusual. And I just live with that question. Well, I had said something during the lecture about biodynamic education, which is Waldorf education. It's also biodynamic. Yeah. It's working with the seasons and the natural rhythm, and how children grow and develop, and when they're ready to read, and so I had said that, and this person during break came up to me and he said, "Hey, there is this medicine that you might be interested in. It's called anthroposophic medicine. And he gives me this pamphlet, and I'm looking at it. And I had kind of heard it because my kids were at a Waldorf school, and I wasn't totally sold on it because it's not mainstream medicine. And I thought, I don't really trust things that are not mainstream unless I can see that they've worked or see the science behind it.
Yes.
You know, I'm very critical of things that are not mainstream. So I'm looking at this pamphlet, and I turn the back over, and I look, and I'm like, this is you. And he goes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, so I probably have to go to this.
Yeah.
Because you came all the way to this conference. I probably have to go. He goes, yeah, I think you have to go.
So did you ever find out how he was able to go to that conference while being
I
an
never
MD?
asked him. I never asked him. Because, you know, and we joke about it to this
Yeah.
day. He's like, I had to come all the way to Ashland to find you.
Yeah.
So I ended up going to this conference and you know, had a very big increase in my understanding of the holistic capabilities of the body from this conference. You know, we're talking about the boson God particle and physics and all this
What
stuff.
is
and
that God particle?
So they have this accelerator, and they accelerate these two particles towards each other, and supposedly they were able to access this time-space continuum aspect that supposedly proved God exists.
Okay.
This was like in the mid-90s or something.
Okay.
So they were talking about it at this conference, and I just had this big realization that, like, you know, my entire life, even as, you know, 19-year-old, I was in these bookstores looking at Stephen Hawking and Michio Kaku and all these brilliant physicists, and then also reading Eckhart Tolle and like kind of the metaphysical, like, what is this? There has to be something. There has to be a theory of everything. I remember studying superstring theory, and then that fell away, and every new theory that came about to kind of describe it all, I was so interested in. And when I was at this conference, during that lecture on the boson-Higgs God particle, it just hit me like, wow, like, you know, like this whole idea of spirit or spirituality, in my mind, was a human construct. In fact, I so resisted any kind of religion for so long that I pulled my kids from the Waldorf school here in town because they were teaching, they gave my kids this like beautiful bag of jewels, and they were teaching the dreidel song and about all this stuff, and I go into their classroom and I see this picture of Madonna holding Jesus, and I just immediately rejected it. Because in my mind, religion was war and death and killing, and religion has no place in this scientific world. And, you know, that spirituality is merely a human construct. But in this physics lecture, something changed, where all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's a spirituality beyond the humanness. There is something else that's out there, and some kind of switch flipped. And, you know, fast forward to now, you know, I went through the integrity thing, I went through the warmth thing, you know, all these things were necessary, and I saw in that time that, gosh, all of these steps leading up to now were necessary. That there is a plan that I have, not control, but I have participation in. I'm able to participate. But I've been held this entire time by some fabric that's bigger than me. And oh my gosh, it's all the same. When you're talking about Buddhism, or Judaism, or Christianity, or, you know, like any of these things, like, oh my goodness, there's a capital T truth in all this that's beyond intellect, beyond rationality, but yet is something that we can go to as a touchstone. And so, you know, doing all this traveling, fast forward all this time, you know, it gave me the perspective that life is meant to be lived. We are meant to experience life, to suffer for the right reasons, to help our fellow human beings with their suffering, not to suffer for them, but to maybe witness them and walk with them.
Hold space for them.
Hold space for them. And that if we can wait for that pause and act, we can live within the rhythm of life instead of fighting it all the time. And when we're in this volatile political, I mean, we're 2 weeks or something, 3 weeks from election, we're close.
I mean, volatile is, I think, downplaying what's happening right now.
It's intense.
It is.
It's insane.
Yeah.
We see people traumatized, not able to use their frontal lobe, and they are viciously attacking the enemy.
Yeah.
So having the perspective that, where's the center? Where's my center? Where is that center that can include all of the people that are reactive? How can I participate in the call and response of my fellow human beings and not add trauma to them?
Yeah.
You know, not react to what they're saying, but instead hear their tone. Because it's within tone that our animal amygdala nature lives, which is why I use sound with ketamine. It's the tone. In fact, when we talk to animals, we can talk to our dog and be like, "You're the dumbest little animal ever."
And
they'll be like, "Oh."
Yeah, right.
Like, it's the tone,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, right now is like what can be helpful to be sensitive and to hear the tone of our fellow people,
Yeah.
you know, and not the words that they're saying, because it's the tone that's important. It underlies and exposes their vulnerability and their fear and their walls and their whatever they're going through. You know, their lived experience is valid.
Well, that's what social media takes away, is the tone.
And all you see is the words.
Yeah. Which makes it so divisive. And that's, I think, that's a beautiful way of bringing it back to tone, is what I've been feeling lately with social media, is all this division, all this hate, because you're not hearing people's tone when they are writing something. People aren't listening to your tone when you're trying to explain yourself, and instead they're trying to assign a tone and react to that assigned tone because that's easier. Yeah, that's hard. So do you have any, like, what's COVID like for you? What is, you know?
You know, luckily, I say luckily, I had it in February before lockdown. You know, it sucked.
Yeah.
I felt like I had mono. I was fatigued for 6 weeks. I had a fever for 3 days, but the fatigue was real. I had residual joint pain for months afterwards. But I never experienced fear because I know I got through it.
Yeah.
So I was able to kind of sit back and hear the fear and have compassion for it instead of bringing my fear to the table.
Yeah.
And I mean fear on both sides, right? The fear of people that think that their loved one is going to die.
Yeah.
You know, because it is happening in
Yes.
nursing homes.
Yes.
It's real. The fear of also social isolation. You know, I have had patients on suicide watch, teenagers. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
The fear of the body's ability to heal.
Yeah.
The fear of the symptoms has been expanded. The fear of losing rights. The fear that we're never going to go back to where we were. The fear of losing privacy.
Yeah.
The fear that we can't get the medical care we need. So, you know, and also looking at what are my fears in that. Because that's a big thing, you know, there's a really nice fear exercise that anyone can do, and you take out a piece of paper and you write everything you're afraid of. You know, I'm afraid of heights, I'm afraid of spiders, I'm afraid of whatever it is. And then you sit with it for a day and you come back to that same piece of paper, and then you get deeper. Like, I'm afraid of failing, I'm afraid of succeeding, I'm afraid of being married, I'm afraid of not being married. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can be afraid of both sides. And then you sit for a few days, then you come back and see if there's anything to add. And at some point, you know, a week later, you come back to it and you read these fears out loud. It's important to read them out loud so you can hear them. And when you say it out loud, you'll be like, oh, that's not true. That is true. And you can start crossing off those things that really aren't true for you. And then you put it down. You pick it up a few days later, and you look at these fears again, and you really look at them, you know, from all these different ways, you know, because one thing about ketamine, and this can be done with meditation or yoga or any of your consciousness shifting practices, you can look at something, the more angles you can look at a problem, the more balanced and less polar and reactive that problem is until the problem disappears. Because the energy is balanced around it. And that's how you can deal with, not to say that all of your fears will go away. But you might not be as reactive. And it's something that I use with a lot of, some of my patients. And it's free, which I love.
That's amazing. So, given everything we've talked about, give us a little bit, kind of a synopsis of the importance, because you're in the medical field, but you do so much more than that. So tell us about encompassing everything together that you believe in, you know, eating well, meditation, finding that balance. You still address things when they need to be addressed medically.
For sure.
So someone who is just starting this journey of realizing how strong they are as a person, but just how many different selves we have. We have our body, we have our, you know, our mentality, we have our emotions. How do you tie everything in together? What's a healthy balance?
I would say some of the important things that are going to give you a big payload are sleep, seasonal sleeping. You know, this idea that we get 8 hours a night the whole year, I think is antiquated and not right. I think we need less sleep in the summer. I think somehow we get more energy from sunlight, or, you know, some way. I think that nourishes us in lieu of sleep. And more sleep in the winter. I think that if you are focusing on healing, that's the first thing that needs to be addressed. Sleep. So clean up your sleeping environment, take out anything electronic from your room. If you can turn off the breakers to turn off the electricity, so you can fall into that deep sleep without any competing wavelengths, because we are wavelengths. Come into my operating room, I'll show you all the wavelengths on my monitors. There's no doubt we're electrical. So turn off all those competing wavelengths, go to sleep an hour after sunset. That means you have to eat an hour before sunset, which means you might have to adjust your life. You know, you might not be able to do night shift or whatever that is. Have your partner put the kids to bed, and then you take the early part, or however you can make that work. But for 6 months, focus on sleep. Make it a priority. Something else I found really helpful for me was I did restorative yoga before any other exercise. My body needed to learn what parasympathetic rest was. That sensationless idea of restorative, where everything, you are not activating any muscle spindle anywhere in your body. You are fully supported and you can just let go. I did that for 2 years before I moved on. learning how to forgive yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because we all make mistakes.
Yes.
Big mistakes
Yes.
in our life.
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to really realize that that doesn't define you.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that you could learn from,
Mm-hmm.
and forgive yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think those are the biggest 3 things that helped me
Mm-hmm.
and my process. And then from there, you know, try to listen to your body. Try to eat when you're hungry. You might eat 1,000 calories in one day and 6,000 calories another.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're listening to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
it's the right thing to do.
There's a term I like, bioindividuality. I think it's beautiful.
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, some people might be doing the keto diet, some people might be doing no carbs, some people, but it doesn't mean that that's what you have to do. You have to really build that relationship with yourself
Mm-hmm.
to really hear what your body needs.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
for sure,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Oops. I guess let me address them for a
Yes.
second and then we'll finish up.
Why you not work?
Hey, you're naked. Go inside. Okay, dame besito and I'll be back, okay? All right. 1, 2, and then go with Daddy.
I always say that to the Hispanic patients
Yeah.
that come in. I'm like, besitos.
Yep.
Always.
Yep, it solves many issues.
Yes, mommy
Besitos?
medicine.
I know.
Yeah, and I think another thing is too, no matter what environment you grew up in, to forgive your parents.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds so trite and it sounds so simple and it sounds, but it's, you know, forgiving your parents gives you the gift of stopping that narrative in your head
Yeah.
of whatever you adopted because of the words and tone and voice that they used.
Mm-hmm.
When you can forgive them, then you can forgive those repeating things in your head and
Yeah.
just stop.
Yeah.
Forgiving all the people that have done you wrong, having a gratitude practice,
Mm-hmm.
having, if you can, I like to encourage my patients to tune into the current now, and I know you and I have talked about this,
Yes.
how to just fall into now. And a lot of people, it's through touch
Mm-hmm.
that can orient them to this moment in
Mhm.
time. And get to that place where you have a nowgasm, is
Mhm.
what I call it. Like,
Mhm.
you are so in the now, you're like, whoa, you know? Kind of like hearing that, when you hear really good music, or
Yeah.
really good, and you get that dopamine hair standing
Yes.
up, a nowgasm is the same way.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're just,
Present.
life is so good right now.
Yeah.
This moment, the light coming in the window at dinner time, and I'm cooking, and my family's here, and oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how are you incorporating this into your own family? What do you teach your kids? Because they're homeschooled now,
Yeah,
right?
they're homeschooled now because our school kind of fell apart,
Mhm.
just because of it's happening
Yes.
everywhere. It's no fault
Mhm.
whatsoever. But you know, we go to bed early. We eat at the same time every day.
Mhm.
You know, like, it shifts with the sun, but
Mhm.
generally we eat. They know.
Mhm.
It's predictable. I have in my kitchen, I have a wall of west-facing windows, so the
Mhm.
sun comes in. Well, I hang these little prisms,
Uh-huh.
these little, just clear crystal things.
Yeah.
And so there's rainbows all over my kitchen
That's
and dining room.
Yeah, that's cool.
So while I'm cooking,
Mhm.
there's rainbows everywhere.
Dancing everywhere.
Everywhere. And
Yeah.
it's so, it's childish,
Yeah.
but it's beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And
But
it's
what is
nature.
childish? Joy.
Joy.
Yeah.
And my kids are in there with me. You know, when I'm in the kitchen, they're there with me. I'm Italian. It's just how it is. They know the kitchen is my office.
Yes.
And it's where I make nourishing meals.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't mention the rainbows, but they feel it.
Yes.
Things like that, you know. It's keeping seasonal pieces on my table right when you walk in, whether it's, right now it's acorns and red leaves and,
Mhm.
you know, those types of things. And,
Yeah.
you know, in the summer it's seashells and sand and
Mhm.
agates, where
Mhm.
we like to go agate hunting in
Mhm.
Oregon. You know, keeping this connection to natural rhythm alive. You know, it's really big. In the winter, my kids all get hot water bottles to go to sleep with. Every single one, whether they're sick or not.
Yeah.
You know, so that they can feel this warmth. A trick I used for all the parents that have trouble getting their kids to sleep, the sensory kids, put a blanket in the dryer before bedtime, turn up the heat in the house a few degrees, just while they're transitioning to sleep, put the warm blanket on them, and after they're asleep, turn it down more than you normally would to keep it a little bit cooler.
Yeah.
And that works wonders. Kids fall asleep faster. And you save more money.
Yeah, you do. Well, I also noticed that when my kid's room gets really hot during the night, they're like,
They're uncomfortable.
They're so uncomfortable.
But
They
during
get
sleep transition, the 2-degree temperature increase puts them right out.
So really connecting with the rhythm of life is so important.
It's a gift we can give to ourselves because the rhythm is always here. My kids always knew before school that the naked ladies came up. You know, those pink, beautiful flowers. They see that and they're
We're
like...
talking about flowers, you guys.
Flowers, of course. They see that and they know it's immensely time to get ready for school. You know, those things.
Pointing those out to them.
Or even just having it. It doesn't have to be verbal. You know, just we build an Advent tree every year of limbs that we've cut down over the years to, you know, just regular pruning. We save those big pieces of wood and we make a tree so we don't have to cut down a tree at winter. You know, it's just this whole thing that we do and we created ourselves. And, you know, I'm not strong enough to go cut down a tree and bring it in. And it's, you know, my ex-husband and I are no longer together. And so it's something that I can do. I modified it and now it's a tradition that we have. And just keeping those, you know, making big deals of accomplishments. You know, we throw parties all the time. We had a roller skating thing where we took all the furniture out of the living room and turned the lights in my house. We got one of those like those laser light things and turned all the lights off. And my kids had rollerblades with the fancy wheels that light up, and we put the music on, you know, just the radio, and
it's fun.
And we celebrate. We're celebrating all the time. We make cakes for everything. You know, even if it's just little cakes. You know, we celebrate, and you know, the joy that you talk about. I think that's...
And it's so interesting because the way society is set up, it's so go, 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 go. It's hard to find rhythm within the chaos. But you're saying that it's very important to find your rhythm amongst the chaos.
If you think of a boulder going down the hill and it gets momentum, it's going to keep going once it started. When you set up rhythm, there's not, when's dinner, when's this, when's that. The kids relax into knowing, oh, I see. I asked Lucas something. He said, when are we going to leave the river? And I said, when the sun moves a certain amount of degrees. And he goes, oh, that's 20 minutes. But it took him a minute. But he figured it out because we're outside so much. And he also catches, my family, we're just big sun people. We watch the rhythm. We get our, you know, telescope out and we watch how Saturn and Jupiter were really right next to each other in the sky last month. And we're watching the satellite, you know, the new satellites go through. We're watching, oh, those are paired and this, that, and, you know, just paying attention.
That's huge. That's huge. Is there anything else that you feel like someone would benefit from hearing right now before we end this?
I would say the last thing is, if there is something that you can put your faith into, and it does not have to be spiritual. It can be, but it can be, can you put your faith in your culture? Can you put your faith in your family? Can you put your faith in your women's group? Your book club? Can you put that so that when you are rattled, you can go into that space, get built up again, and then step back out and be your own person. And not become that. So in other words, you wouldn't want to put yourself into a political party or into a anything radical. What I'm talking about are the sustaining groups that we have, the things that nourish us. You know, if you can put your faith, give up your problem. You acknowledge your problem. You say, like, I'm having anxiety right now. You don't suppress it, but you say, I'm going to give that up and be with these people in community, or be with my spiritual deity of choice in in commune. And you do that, and okay, then you step back in and touch back to your problem. I think that's the one thing I would want to leave people with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow, I am feeling all kinds of warm and buzzes. Yay! This was such an honor, and I knew we had something going on.
Oh yeah,
I knew we did, and so I'm so thankful
likewise
for you making the trip,
So much
and I
gratitude.
hope that everyone listening has gained something from this conversation. And I think that we should really go forth and keep having these conversations, because, like you say, tone is so important. And so I'm so glad that you were able to come in here. I'm so thankful, and I'm actually really thankful that you touched up on everything that you did, because it's so reassuring on how important it is for us to find balance, especially right now. And connecting with people, finding ourselves. But anyway, I know you have something to get to.
Thank you.
So I appreciate you.
Oh, so great. Oh, so much love.
Yes, likewise. Likewise.